John the Baptist comes along on the second Sunday of Advent. Always on the second Sunday of Advent, we hear John the Baptist all of a sudden out in the wilderness. And we hear John quoting Isaiah and using the words, prepare the way, prepare the way. In the wilderness, I will carve out a highway. And John the Baptist clues us into two things. One is that God isn't just working on each one of us individually. God isn't just working to free each of us. God is working on all of us together. God is working on humanity, on the world. And God is not just taking quick little, fragile little pecks at us. God comes sometimes with dynamite. God not only chips away marble, God carves pathways through mountains. God blasts through mountains so that God's people and God's creation can return to God and be fully alive. When John the Baptist comes out in the wilderness, saying to the people of Judea, prepare ye the way of the Lord. In the wilderness I will make a highway. He was quoting the words of Isaiah, who 500 years previous to Jesus was trying to preach words of comfort to the people of Israel. We know the story of the exile. You remember the story of the exile. That in about the year 580, the Babylonians from the east came and they conquered Israel, and they took most of the Israelites back to Babylon to work there as forced laborers. The time of Daniel in the lion's den and King Nebuchadnezzar and so forth. Well, for 80 years, the Israelites are in exile. And for 80 years, they weep beside the rivers, remembering their dear country of Israel. And then, fortunately for them, Persia comes down and conquers Babylon, and Darius, the Persian king, says to the Israelites in Babylon, you're free to go home. You can go home now. That's good news, but the problem was, how are they going to get home? Because in between Babylon and Israel is this huge wilderness, crisscrossed with high mountain peaks that are so difficult to get over, and also with ravines that are so difficult to get through. There's no way home. And that's when Isaiah says to them, God's going to come to carve out a highway for you through the wilderness. God is going to come to blast through the mountains to make a path. God is going to fill in the valleys. God is going to bring you home again. Advent is the time when God comes with a promise to us and says to us, both in you and in your families and in the world, you so often live in exile. You so long often live separate from each other and separate from me. I'm going to carve out paths for you. I'm going to open a way for you. All the things you face in your life seem so permanent, but I will carve out a path for you. We have a wonderful example of that right here with the Columbia River Gorge. That path that was carved out by the Columbia River from ice runoff from Missoula, Montana Glacier so many years ago. But also as we see a path carved through the mountains, and we also see those roads that get carved into the hillside. If you drive out Highway 14, you see there's a highway that's literally carved into the hillside. That's the image of God's promise through John the Baptist. God says this, you look at the world, and it's so easy to feel yourself covered by this mountain of problems, the mountain of despair in the world, the mountain of poverty in the world, the mountain of injustice in the world, the mountain of violence in the world. It seems so permanent. It seems so constant. But I come amongst you to blast through that. I come among you to carve a highway through the wilderness, a way home. And so that's what we hold on to, this process of God, the artist at work, the road maker at work. And again, we ask ourselves, and we say, okay, where in our lives do we need that? Where in our lives do we need that? And so that suggests that Advent time is a time when we can practice spiritual discipline, spiritual activities that will help us make use of this time. We get so incredibly busy during this time on lots of good causes, buying presents and decorating the house, and those are all beautiful things. But once again, we're reminded in Advent to find a moment of quiet in order to not miss the deepest purpose of the whole thing, to find some moments of quiet. For, first of all, the discipline of prayer. Our prayer to God simply might be, God, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who is the person that you are dreaming me to be? And how can I become that person? How can I be free to become that person? The prayer can also be on behalf of all of us. God, who are we? Who are we? Just to ask that question, who are we as your people here at Beautiful Savior? What's our true identity? Who are you at work to help us become? Who are we as the nation of the United States? Who are we as your people in the world? I think Advent is a time to return to the sense of who God is crafting and making us to be. So I encourage you to find just a moment of quiet to ask God, who am I, Lord? And who are we? And then the second step to that is to sit quietly. Is to sit quietly and listen for the answer. Listen for the stirring. Our prayer during Advent, our prayers to begin the service are these stir-up prayers. Stir up your power and come. But today's was stir up our hearts, O Lord. And so I encourage you to pray the prayer of asking for God for a new sense of who you are and where God is leading you. Then also to listen in the quiet and see how God might be stirring you. What's the vision that comes to you? What's the sense of what you should be doing with your life now? What's the sense of who we should be as a congregation and who we should be as a nation and as a world? The time of Advent is a time of holy hibernation. It's a time of journey towards birth. It's also a time to open ourselves to God, the artist who is at work among us. We are works in process. But God comes to bless us, to break away the stones that hold us captive, to cut through the mountains that stand in our way. God comes to bring forth